Good morning. I really am looking forward to closing out this series. Love, it's more than a feeling because, as Bridget just said in her prayer, love is such an incredibly foundational concept to the life of a Christian, to those who follow Christ. And yet we experience love in all sorts of different ways, and we express love in all different sorts of ways. And like I said, today is kind of a PG-13 Sunday. Again, you'll know why later on in terms of just some of the themes we need to talk about as a church and as people to understand kind of this natural drifting concept we have to just kind of falling short and kind of being broken in our understanding of love. But as always, we want to make sure we want you to ask questions, whether that's particular about the series or some things going on in your life. We answer those at the end of every second service. We had some great questions so far in this series come up about love in terms of how it's playing itself out. And we put those on our YouTube channel for folks to have access to throughout the week. And so you can always go online and see that. But you can text the number there or email, and that's always on the screen. Just it won't be just there, but it'll be on the bottom of the screen throughout the morning. We have been looking at the question, what is love? Okay, that's the question that kind of prompted the series, what is love? We say love is more than a feeling, and yet love is a feeling, right? It is a feeling, it is a state of being. It's the thing that can make us kind of leap and fly. It's also the thing that can make us feel like we're falling and crushed to our death. Am I right? It is a feeling, but we wanted to know what else is it? Is it anything more than that? And I wasn't here last week. Don did such an incredible job on Valentine's Day last week, just kind of really helping express what it looks like between us. But I'm going to do my very best before we jump into today to recap the last 2 weeks, just to give us a sense of where we've been, okay? And so, what is love is the question. And the first week we decided that based on what we could see, love is not necessarily defined by our emotions, right? Love is a choice. And the fact that love is a choice is a big deal because once we understand that love is not just this sort of compassion and passion and kind of flittery feelings and emotions that kind of drive us towards all the things we do that are sort of insatiable or it's like an appetite, then we can have somewhat of an idea that love is a choice. Therefore, when you understand the context of choices, you understand that there's a who involved. Right? There's always a who involved when it comes to choices because I'm going to choose something different based on who you are and based on who I am. So who is always involved? And the common thing that's in every love story, no matter what emotions you kind of parallel yourself with in terms of romantic comedies or movies or poems or love stories or songs, doesn't matter. Whatever it is that makes you tear up when you think of love, right? No matter what it is, there's always one common element, and that is there is a who that has chosen and made a choice to pour out their love to someone else, to give their love to someone else. That's always the common piece. So we weren't just going to ask, what is love? Because sometimes we feel like asking the wrong questions always gives us wrong answers. So in the context of asking what is love, we needed to know who is love. And that's the first week we said defining what love is starts with who love is. It starts there. It starts with understanding of who love is. And then last week, again, Don reread, and we're going to read it again today. Every week we kind of read the same verses. That kind of famous 1 Corinthians 13, verse that everybody has read at their wedding, right? Love is patient and kind, and you have a pillow at home or it's framed somewhere in your grandma's house. It's a very, very famous set of verses. And Don began by reading the beginning of verse of Corinthians 13. Matter of fact, the end of 12 is Paul basically in his letter saying, hey, I know you guys are struggling with how to live as Christians. Let me tell you a better way to live, because they were worried about some other things. Let me tell you a better way to live. And then he starts 13 with these weird statements like, if I had the ability to speak in all manner of tongues, but if I didn't have love, then it would just be noise. It'd just be a clanging cymbal, is what he says. And if I had the ability to move mountains with my faith or, understand all mysteries and have all knowledge, if I didn't have love, then it was nothing or would gain me nothing. And where he was kind of going with that is this idea of the have word in the early part of 1 Corinthians 13 is this possession. That if I don't have love, I don't possess love before it even gets to the whole verses of love is and love is and love is. And this possession is really a root word where it kind of signifies to us that it's not an element, it's not a characteristic, it's not an expression. It's an entity. If I don't have this entity itself, then I have nothing. Then he goes on to explain, well, love is kind and love is patient and love doesn't do this and love does this. And as it begins to explain that, we go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Now we're talking about the expressions of love, but it doesn't actually tell us who love is. And we understood by reading some other passages in John that really God is love. And so last week, one of the big elements was that we said that God's love really is the key to loving others selflessly. Right? He opened up that passage. It was Valentine's Day last week. Hopefully you all had a wonderful Valentine's Day. Thank you. You're welcome. I know Journey Church had a big part of that. No, last week was Valentine's Day, and there was this concept of just, what does it look like to play itself out with us? Well, Don read from Ephesians 5, which is the kind of a marriage passage, if you will. And what does it look like in marriage to live like this? Have this kind of love in your marriage. Well, women and their power and strength, submit to a husband who is not really worth submitting to. Right? And men who in their ability to love sacrificially, like love so much more than they love their own life and their own selves, love their wife and put her up above and beyond anything else. And you think, wow, those two things would be awesome if that were true, right? But it started with this mutual submission. It started with this passage that said, look, as you are going to submit to others, you're going to submit to each other out of your submission to God, out of your submission to Christ. And so Paul kind of paints this picture of, hey, it works itself out. The selfless love can work itself out in your relationships. Oh, by the way, here's a picture of what it looks like. When we understand the key of God's love, that who is love, it's really God. And so we kind of go back to that passage in 1 John. I'll read it now as a recap, that John kind of clearly helps us see that we know how much God loves us. We just sang all these songs this morning about how much he loves us. And we've put our trust in his love. Why? Because God is love. Several times in that chapter, he goes on to kind of flip the words around. Everyone who lives in God lives in love, and all who understand love understand God. Because God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And then one of my favorite passages in 1 John, it says, as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. And you can even replace that word if you want with the fullness of the word, which is our love grows more complete. It grows more full. It grows more perfect in its nature, right? It's this idea that as we live in God, as we understand that love, our love grows more perfect. And so the bottom line last week, as we were kind of building, is that selfless love, this love that comes from God, this choice-driven love, not emotion-driven love, but this choice can only be expressed when we're experiencing who love is. It can only really be expressed to one another when we experience who love is. And so today, I will say that today is really more of an end cap. It's more of a closing argument, if you will, of what we've already been talking about over the last 2 weeks. We've kind of specifically and on purpose not been reading the ends of passages over the last 2 weeks. Because today, as I read the ends of 1 Corinthians 13, and as I read the end of 1 John 4, I want us to see the big picture, the perfect picture, the complete picture of this love that we're trying to get a better understanding of, all right? Again, we use love in all sorts of concepts, in all sorts of language. It's a pretty good idea if Christians, we understood what we were talking about. That's just my opinion, right? All right, so we're going to go back to 1 Corinthians 13. And again, this is a passage we've read several times over this series. But we're going to go back and read it again. And we're going to look at this beautiful passage and try to, again, see the fullness of the thought that was written. All right, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Paul is writing the church and talking about a better way to live and a better way to understand things as God is love. And again, he starts off, hey, if I had the ability to speak the language, if I could speak the language that all women understood, right? Every man wishes we could have that at some point. If I could understand all mysteries, which means I could understand women, right? If I could move mountains with my faith, if I could give myself to the poor, it goes on to say all these things. But if I didn't have love, I don't possess love, it's nothing. And then we go to these famous verses. Matter of fact, we're all going to read it together. How's that sound? It's good to have a little bit of interaction on Sundays, all right? We're going to just read this together. You guys all know these words. Let's just read it together, all right? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And there's a finishing thought to these verses. But when we read those verses again, I think when we're in a wedding, I think when we're getting married, right? If you remember your wedding, I think when these things are read, I think when these things are said, people are just living in this kind of utopian view of the fact that, yes, that is us, right? That is us. That will be our love, right? And I don't know about you, but like I can't put my name there. Matt is kind. Matt is patient. Matt always protects and always, perseveres and always is faithful. Matt, never keeps records of wrongs. That's not true. I have a list, right? I'm like you. So if you put your name there, again, it goes back to at some point we fail. But if you put God's name there, you put God is kind, Jesus is hope, always hopes, Jesus always perseveres. No matter what you do there, that begins to make sense. And then in verse 8, Paul makes this statement as he closes out the thought of love. Love never fails. It always hopes, it always protects, it always trusts, it always perseveres. Love never fails. And again, we hear that and it's written and it's on a pillow and it's on a diet and we look and we go, yes, yes, because that's what we all want, right? It starts young. It starts with Disney movies. I've decided that's where it starts. It starts when we're young, and I saw it with my kids, the Disney movies, because every Disney movie has, in the relationship context, has this beautiful picture of true love's, what is it? True love's what? Kiss. There's a true love's kiss, right? It's special, right? It's going to be happily ever after, right? Forever and ever, right? There's all these things. And I think the reason it's so powerful even for our kids is because that is what our hearts want. That is what our souls long for. That is the love at a basic level that we desire most, all right? So this is where it starts for us. The problem is, and then we hear something like that, we go, yes, love is all these things, and love never fails. Yes. The problem is that we live in a culture, we live in a world with really nothing but examples around us of failing love. Love consistently fails us. That's just what we know. Matter of fact, I even just wrote down a few examples. People in relationships begin to lie to each other in order to protect the other person. People choosing pornography over fighting for intimacy in their marriage. People allowing unhealthy friendships to grow at work because their effort at home is just too hard. People resigning themselves to the loss of love just to justify cheating on a spouse. They end living sexless marriages. And then there's children who grow up and never really understand why their parents chose to love someone else. Children make things extraordinarily clear. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but children understand the whole choice thing. They don't understand why dad doesn't choose mom anymore. They don't understand why mom doesn't choose dad anymore. And I know it's more complicated than that. I know we've complicated even more, but the reality is kids make it very simple. And the worst part of divorce for most children is they don't understand why you don't choose them anymore. And this is where love begins for us as we see example after example after example to begin to break down. And then you have no choice. You become, sort of a hope-sick romantic, You're someone who's kind of holding on to the ushy-gushy feelings that one day I'm going to find true love's kiss. I'm going to find the one, right? I'm going to find all these things. I'm kind of holding to this dream. Or you become extraordinarily cynical and callous to whether love really does exist or not. And really, both extremes are very unhealthy, especially when it comes to our emotions, especially when it comes to our feelings. Both extremes are very, very unhealthy. There's got to be a better approach. There has to be a better way to understand love. Love for us fails because we approach it, and our expression of love really is broken from the beginning. So today, I want to finish chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. Because Paul really does have a consistent thought there. He starts off saying, look, if I had all these things, but I didn't have love, I'd have nothing. And then he goes back to say, even if I had those things, you need to understand that those things are going to pass. Because when he finishes that statement, hey, love never fails, he goes on to say this. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. And where there are tongues, they will be stilled. And where there is knowledge, it will pass away. He says, look, this is going to happen. For what we know in part, we prophesy in part. But when completeness, perfection comes, what is in part disappears. See, all the things that we somewhat strive for, sometimes we think there's going to be the answer because it's the expression. And he says, look, even those things are going to pass away. But love in its fullness, love in completeness is going to remain. And then he goes on in verse 13 to say, these three things actually remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. When you begin to strip down all the things that we tend to put a lot of effort into, when you begin to strip down all these things that we think is the full expression of our hearts, of love, we realize that they will pass away. They will fade away. My folks are 70, I think they're 75, 76 now. Guess what? They're not a mystery to each other anymore. My parents aren't a mystery to each other at all. They're so simple. They speak what's on their mind. Does anybody have any parents like that? There's no more mystery, right? There's no more prophecy. It's all done. It's fade away. There's no more mystery in their marriage. All the things that we think are the things we have to overcome and get past are going to one day be gone. What remains? What really does remain in a marriage like that? Well, hopefully it's that expression of love that we're talking about in terms of the proper understanding of it. He says, look, all these things, when prophecies are gone, when knowledge is, surpasses away, when all of this comes to a completion and fullness and perfection, three things are going to remain. Faith, hope, and love. And love, and the greatest of these, is love. And so as we talk again about this, our approach to love, our definition of love, and how in essence it's somewhat broken, I want us to look at two principles, just two, as to why we deal so often with failed love, failing love, and yet we have been promised unfailing love. We are given, our love story is a love story of unfailing love. That's what 1 Corinthians 13 tells us. We have this love that never fails, and yet we are experiencing, for the most part, failure. Why? Well, here's two principles that I believe kind of play into this idea of failing. Again, two principles of selfish love. I'm using the word selfish love, meaning that in and of its nature, our love kind of is naturally selfish. It's very self-seeking. And it starts here. As long as love is about you, right, your love will always fail. You cannot fulfill you, right? As long as love, we're going to read together. I want you to read this last line. As long as love is all about you, your love will always fail. Read it out loud. You cannot fulfill you. It's nice when you say you because you don't have to pretend it's you. You don't have to pretend it's me. So you just say it one more time. You ready? You cannot fulfill you. It starts with you. The fact that you're experiencing failed love in your life is because it starts with you. Okay, it starts with you. This is a case where, look, people want to get themselves to the right place. They want to be the right person. They want to express the right things. They want to, in and of themselves, they really do feel like if they look the right way and can get the right thing and they can, rich enough, thin enough, handsome enough, pretty enough, healthy enough spiritually, mentally, all those things. If I can get all these things right, I can finally be in a place to love in this way that would be unfailing. And the reality is you can't fill you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. This is where self-help fails us, by the way. Although you can do it. No, you can't, right? You can't. You can't fulfill you, especially when it comes to love. There's a lot of pop psychology that would say, well, you got to love you before anyone else can love you. And I understand what they mean by that from the standpoint of, self-depreciation and self-devaluing is not very healthy. And that's true. It's not. But do you know that even the whole self-depreciation thing is still pretty selfish? Get your mind off of you. Okay? That's just the definition of you. If you stop worrying about how bad you are, you might actually see something else. And so the point is this idea that even when it starts with you, it's going to end there. And that's one of the reasons, I have to be careful. If you're younger in the room, let me just listen. It's one of the reasons that most of our relationships today start out physically. Even for our 12 and 13-year-old kids, it starts out physically. That's what the culture tells us is the best way to start out relationships. And here's why. Because it is the thing that gives perceived satisfaction immediately. If we can start out on a physical plane, then it will give some sense of perceived satisfaction, and we'll start out our relationship in a physical way, and it'll feel like it's filling that need, that desire, if you will, that void. And I'll give into it right away because that's desperately what I want, because love's about me. Love's about, the first week I showed you all the jackets that I wore. It doesn't matter how you approach it, but as long as it starts with you, it's doomed to fail. It's doomed to be broken because you cannot fulfill you. You think you know what you want, but you don't. That's really where this comes down to. Now, the second principle is this. That the love you really desire, it's more than what someone else can offer. They cannot fulfill you. The love that you deeply desire, the love that is in you that you thirst for, is more than what someone else can offer you. They cannot fulfill you. Just read this with me. They cannot fulfill you. One more time. They cannot fulfill you. Now, this is where I want you to hear this in terms of marriages. It's not because they're not trying. It's not because they're not working hard at it. It's not even because sometimes I believe in most marriages that they're not hopeful that they can fill those needs. Most marriages I talk to, most people that have these conversations, it's not because of that. They just can't do it. They can't fulfill what is really, truly there. They cannot do it. And then this is where love fails most often, especially in marriages. As people begin to navigate what it looks like to, have emotional relationships outside of the marriage that are unhealthy, emotional friendships. They begin to justify the love lost that they've already had, so therefore they can justify a side relationship that may or may not be physical. This is definitely how it happens in terms of, I'm not getting certain things met here, so therefore I'm going to leave and go get things met here. This is our nature, and I'm saying that across the board. This may not be true of you in terms of your marriage. I'm saying it's our nature collectively as God's people, that it's our nature to constantly be looking for someone else to fill a need right now, in this moment, that we're not getting filled. Because we're not looking to the right people or the right person to fill the need. Well, I need them to fulfill it. The love that I desire is I'm going to get married and they're going to fill that need. I have premarital counseling conversations with people all the time, and we have a great program called Prepare and Enrich. And there's a place on there it's called Idealistic Distortion is what it's called. It's called Idealistic Distortion. It's when I sit down with a couple and they've marked in an assessment, there's nothing that my spouse could do to make me not love them. And they mark like strongly agree. Oh, I strongly agree. And then their idealistic distortion is off the chart. And I start going, oh, okay, let me just ask you, what if they shoot your dog? Well, I just kind of throw out some options here. What if they cheat on you? Well, yeah, that's what this means. When you answer a question like that, well, there's nothing my spouse could, there's nothing that they could do. No, there is. I can promise you there is. There's some things that would break you. And for you and I, again, when we place all this on someone else, they cannot fulfill you. But it is our nature. And the reason I say it's our nature, and I want to just help you understand it, is that even in the Old Testament and New Testament, especially in terms of how the prophets in the Old Testament, even in Revelation, how the prophets tend to describe God's people as the bride of Christ. And they describe God and Christ as the bridegroom. There's this beautiful picture that we love to talk about sometimes, like the wedding feast and everything that's gorgeous about it, but there's also a ton of times, 20 at least, just in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, where God's people are basically described as whores and adulterers. That's what we're described as. Why? Because it's not a mistake. It's not language they want us to just pass over. It's saying, look, yeah, there's a beautiful picture of love and intimacy and connection between the bridegroom and the bride. But what you need to understand is you, by your nature, consistently look for someone else to fill your needs that can't fill it. And you whore yourself out. That's what you do. That's what we do. Matter of fact, Derek Webb, songwriter, several years ago, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, I'm dating myself now, but he wrote a song called Wedding Dress, and I've always liked his music. He's a little off the chart for me poetically, but this song was very beautiful, and it's got really strange words to it to be beautiful. But it's called Wedding Dress, and here's just a couple words that always get me every time I listen to the song. He says this. He says, hold on, I lost my little quote here. He says, I'm so easily satisfied by the call of lovers so less wild that I would trade a little cash for your sacrificial flesh and blood. The chorus says, I am a whore, I do confess, that I will put you on like a wedding dress and just run down the aisle. Talks about a ring of gold and how constantly our hand is on his side, but it's also on the side of our own pleasure. The whole song is this beautiful picture that we are always going to be accepted as his bride, but the reality is that we ourselves in our own nature will do nothing but whore ourselves out. That's what we do. Because we want something else to satisfy the need, especially when we can see it and taste it and feel it immediately. And yet that love, this desire that's here, it can be filled, but you can't fill it. You can't fulfill you. And they cannot fulfill you. Only he can fulfill you. And so when we start really kind of focusing on this end cap picture of who is love, what is love, we have to consistently know the problem, which is us. The problem, which is our approach, our definition of what we've decided what love is versus what love truly is. And it's only there that we begin, again, that's only there that we can even begin to express love to each other in a way that resembles Christ. If I go back and read the end of John, okay, so we were in 1 Corinthians 13, but 1 John 4 begins, you remember, or not begins, but the verses we were reading was, I know how much God loves us. We put our trust in his love. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And as we live in God, our love grows more perfect, right? Then in 18, he says this, such love, this is the love he's talking about. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. Such love has no fear because this complete and perfect love that we have the opportunity to experience expels all fear. And he goes on to say this, if we're afraid, it's for fear of punishment. And this shows us that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. How do you know what kind of love you're experiencing? Is it filled with fear? See, we can't ignore how tightly woven fear is to love unless we are really honest with ourselves to know that love, that fear that drives love is really driven by this fear of rejection, fear of it not being reciprocated, fear of being vulnerable with someone else because you're fearful of being hurt. That's the kind of love when we're dealing with our love, when we're dealing with our selfish love, when it starts with us or the expectations are on them. That's when our love is being driven by fear. And it says, look, if you're experiencing that in your life, you are not starting in the right place. You're not starting with an unfailing love that has been offered to you, this perfect love, this complete love. And it's a sign, if you will. It's a way for you and I to know that we're not experiencing the songs we sang, how much God loves us, how unfailing his love really is. It's a telltale, if you will, in terms of love. And so he goes on to say right after this that we loved each other because he first loved us. Now, this verse is used all the time and in several contexts, and it's not that it's wrong to use it out of context, but when you read it in line with those verses that God is love, and those who live in God live in love, and our love grows more perfect the more that we live in God. And that love, such love casts out fear. It expels fear. And then when we're not experiencing that, it's because we aren't experiencing his perfect love. We love others because he first loved us. I mean, that's the only reason that we really can love others. The only way in which we can truly love anyone else on this plane is if we are ultimately experiencing his love. I tell people all the time, and I know it's hard, but I tell people when we're in premarital counseling, especially those who are not necessarily on the same page in terms of salvation, in terms of their relationship with God, and I'm very clear to say, look, if you are not walking tightly with God, if you're not walking in relationship with him, I am telling you, I don't care how much you think you love each other, you do not know love. You do not know love if you do not know God. That is as clear as it can possibly be said. Oh, there's tons of people out there who are loving each other and they're not Christians. Well, I do not believe it's love. Because as best as love can be defined properly, the love that never fails comes from him. So if you don't know him, how can you have it? How can you express it? And that really does become the key. Kind of like Don said last week. This key to kind of experiencing that perfect love that casts out fear is when we express it. Now, this is kind of the bottom line for today. That if we want to experience unfailing love, we have to give it away. We have to give that unfailing love away. We have to give that same love that we've received away. You know, God does this in his economy. He does this with things of incredible value. We can experience a portion of it, but we really don't get to experience the fullness of it until we give it away, right? We can experience his forgiveness. We can be saved and experience his forgiveness. But you know, you don't really experience the forgiveness of God until you've had to forgive someone else who doesn't deserve it, right? When you got to forgive someone else who doesn't deserve it and didn't ask for it, you really begin to understand the forgiveness you've been given. When you got to express grace, you understand grace to its fullness when you got to express grace to someone who doesn't deserve it, not worthy. You understand how unworthy you are. When you have to give out mercy, when you want to experience all of those things that God has placed as values, he didn't just give that to you for you. He gave it for you to express. And when you express it, you begin to understand the big picture. When I begin to express a love that is not filled with fear, when I begin to express a love that is unfailing, that is all the things we read in 1 Corinthians 13, it's his love that I'm expressing. It's not because they deserve it. It's not because they're worth it. It's not because in any way, shape, and form they can reciprocate that to me. It's because of who he is and the love that he's given me. And I experience that to a greater level when I begin to give it away. When we pour out his love to others, we experience love that doesn't fail. Now, here's a picture I'll give you. This is a picture of the Dead Sea. Okay? Now, the Dead Sea over in Israel and Palestine, this is an area you read a lot in the Bible about the Dead Sea and the Red Sea and the Sea of Galilee. But the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because it's ultimately dead. Okay? It's salt water that's kind of gone in through the rivers and through north of the Sea of Galilee. It's kind of flowing in. And it goes to this low spot in that area, geographical area, and it just sits there. There's nothing really alive in it anymore. Water goes in and goes nowhere else. Over here in freshwater land, we call it a swamp. That's what we call it, right? Over in freshwater world, it's called a swamp. But over in that area, in terms of seawater, it's called the Dead Sea, and it's massive. All right, now there's some other reasons for this, but I wanted to just give you the simplicity that when they first originally started looking at this, the Dead Sea right now is dying. It's continuing to drop. It's continuing to lose water. That's very strange because it doesn't have as much water going to it. But the reality is, how could anything that has water going to it ever really die? Right? Those of you who ever lived near a swamp, you know what I'm talking about, right? How could anything that has something constantly pouring into it, regardless of the amount, ever truly go away? And yet that is so the case with the Dead Sea right now. And they're pumping thousands upon thousands upon thousands of gallons back into the Dead Sea to try to bring back to life the Dead Sea, which sounds so weird to say. Why is that the case? Well, because just 87 miles north is the Sea of Galilee. And that's where all the resorts are. And that's where they're jet skiing and water skiing and having a ball. And it's beautiful. It's this beautiful, beautiful sea filled with life, filled with aquatic life. It's had some of the greatest discoveries in this past year in terms of how beautiful and amazing that sea really is. And what is the secret with that? Well, it has water coming in and it has water going out. All the things that really express life has water coming in and water going out. That is what the nature of that is. And when I looked at that picture this week, I just thought, you know what? It's such a good picture from the standpoint of this love that we've received from God is amazing. It's beautiful. It's overwhelming to us. And we can do our best to try to understand it. But the best way to understand it is to start expressing it. Because if I'm trying to understand God's love, but I'm not expressing it to my wife, I'm not really understanding it. If I'm trying to understand God's love, but I'm not pouring it out on my kids, then I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. If I'm trying to understand what's coming in, and that the unfailing love that I have the opportunity to experience, that my relationships with anyone, my staff, with you, the people in my life, my friends, that love that I'm expressing isn't really love. It starts with me, and I can't fulfill me, and it's placed on you, and you can't fulfill me, and it's doomed to fail. It's doomed to be broken. The best kind is, and I can look at 21 years of my marriage, is many, many years where I was more of the Dead Sea. I was receiving love from God, but I wasn't giving anything to my wife that was from him. And there are several times that I can look back on and say, that love that existed in my marriage at that point between my wife and I had a whole lot more to do with what we were receiving, and it was just overflowing to each other. It was being expressed to each other than it ever had to do with what we had the power to do, what we had the ability and strength to do. It was his love being expressed through us. And those are the times that I felt more loved by God, was when I was expressing that kind of love to my wife, to my kids. So you want to know what love is? You want to know who love is? It all lies in this beautiful picture of expressing what you've been given. Allowing what is overwhelming to you to be passed through you. That's how a marriage can function on mutual submission, where you're constantly going, no, you first, no, you first, no, you first. How does that happen? How does a woman submit to men that really they're not worthy of being submitted to? How does a man love a wife and place her on a pedestal when she's not worthy of it? More so than he loves his own life. How does that happen? It happens because of the love they've been receiving, the love they've been experiencing. And it plays itself out in a marriage. How do you get to a place in your life where you don't choose you don't choose to jump right to the physical side of your relationships because you're not looking for someone else to fulfill you because they can't fulfill you? You look to him first. I'm telling you, you can change the definition of love. You can change the broken love and the failing love that you've been experiencing in your life. I don't know where you are in this. I don't know if you're in the middle of a struggle right now at home with a marriage that's failing and love that's failing. I don't know if you're in the wake right now of brokenness because of failed love. I don't know if you're right now what I like to call the honeymoon stage of love, where everything's just amazing, right? All the flittery, floating flutties are there, right? They're all made, it's so great. I don't know where you are in this journey. What I want you to know is no matter where you are, there's a better foundation for love that will not fail. You have access to it. You can experience it. But you have to begin to let it flow through you. You got to begin to let that beautiful, unfailing love come to you and flow through you to others. It doesn't start with you and it doesn't start with them. That's the hardest thing we have to get past. It starts with who love is. So I don't know where you sit today, but I'm praying that this particular conversation, this particular series would begin to change some of your questions and change some of the answers you're going to land on when it comes to love. And that you'll begin to experience the unfailing love of God as you give it away. Let's pray together this morning. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for your word and the way it challenges us. I'm so thankful for those closing thoughts and ideas. Not just that love is all of those things, but that love never fails, God. That there's so many things that will pass away, but faith, hope, and love will remain because of who you are. God, I'm so thankful that you are love. And that because you are love, the love that we're receiving from you expels fear. It casts it out. We do not have to live and love others with fear attached to it. We can love freely and fearlessly because you loved us first. God, I pray today that you would begin to overwhelm us. And as the psalmist said, that our cup would be so full, we would have no choice but to overflow to others. And that the love that others experience in our lives is totally coming from you and not from us. We pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen.